Welcome back. The intelligence community says China's weaponizing space to, quote, match or exceed U.S. capabilities in space. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has a new evaluation of those threats from China and other adversaries. Kaitlyn Johnson's deputy director of the Aerospace Security Project at CSIS. Kaitlyn, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. You and your colleagues write in this work, 2020 was largely a year of continuity and predictability in space. Is that a good thing or a bad thing given where we are in our space journey?
Probably a good thing because nothing horribly unexpected happened. I think 2020 was relatively quiet, at least on the counterspace front, these threats in space. But for the civil space side, we saw some great success from nations all around the world. And that's, I think, where the accountability and predictability came into.
You note in this work a number of things that Space Force accomplished, and several of them you've talked about on this program before, the Space Power Doctrine for Space Forces, and you note the Commander Strategic Vision that came out in February. What are the pieces of those that mean the most, do you think, to the other military services outside Space Force for where the military is going broadly?
Sure. Well, I think the doctrine was a great step forward for the Space Force to set the tone for how they want to continue to work in space. What I'm really looking forward to, that's supposed to come out in the next week or so, is the personnel guidance. So for the guardians, the space officers themselves, how they're going to continue to organize and support the people who are doing the space mission, as well as bring in people from the other services, and are releasing a report on how the Space Force is going to be digital first, or a digital service. I'm very interested in seeing how they've brought in, because both of those recommendations were something that were really important to Congress when they were establishing the Space Force.
You and your colleagues have been doing this work for a number of years. What are the trend lines that you see? How are things developing year on year in space, both in regards to the United States and in regards to our potential adversaries, Kaitlyn?
Sure. So this is the fourth year we've written this report along with our colleagues at the Secure World Foundation. And what we've both found is a continual increase in development and testing of counterspace weapons, not just these direct ascent ASATs, so missiles launched from Earth that intercept a target in space, but also other counterspace weapons that are being used in gray zone areas, other areas of irregular warfare, like jamming that can really disrupt communications and GPS signals that impact our troops. And so we've seen all of these attacks occur in the past couple of years, and they just continue to build and be used in different areas of other conflict.
In this work, you assess what is happening in China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, the four nations named in the National Defense Strategy, National Security Strategy, and so on as potential adversaries of the United States. The only other country that you call out with its own chapter is India. What's significant about what India, as our ally, or at least not our adversary, what's significant about what they're doing in space, Kaitlyn?
Great question. So we have an entire chapter devoted to India because they have been very prominent in developing their own counterspace weapon arsenal. So in 2019, India tested a direct ascent ASAT. They intercepted a satellite as it was orbiting over Earth, destroying it, causing a lot of debris to come back into Earth's atmosphere and burn up on descent, but also a couple of pieces, stayed in orbit. And so they definitely are continuing to pursue these kind of counterspace capabilities, I think, partially as their own kind of defense as they look towards their adversary of China.
Our goals in space are rather clear. I think the other nations that you called on here, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, their goals in space are rather clear. What are India's goals in space, Kaitlyn? Are they looking at just defensive posture, or are they eventually thinking about an offensive posture too?
I think it's mostly defensive for now. I think what's really a prominent goal for India as well is their civil space capabilities. So they've had an unsuccessful lunar mission that failed a year or two ago, and they're working on another test that will send a rover to the moon. And so it's not just space from the military side, but from the civilian side as well. And I think it, for them, is investing in STEM education and in their people and their economy, but also as their prominence as a world player in space.
You know, I love the question, what will you watch? And so I was very happy to see that the last chapter in this report is what to watch. What should we watch, Kaitlyn? Give me a synopsis of that chapter.
Sure. So I think what's really interesting about the 2021 report that we just released is that on the counterspace side, China was actually relatively quiet in 2020, possibly because of the pandemic. But Russia was incredibly active in counterspace developments, and so I expect these to continue. Russia tested 2 direct ascent ASAT weapons, as well as several on-orbit capabilities. And while a lot of talk surrounds China, especially from the US side in our intelligence community, we cannot forget that Russia is also pursuing these developments as well. And so we need to be tracking both. And I expect both of them to continue to use and operate space weapons to train their soldiers and their militaries to use space as an enabler.
Kaitlyn Johnson, thanks very much as always. Great to have you back.
Thanks, Francis.